Howdy folks, welcome to another episode of DevOps Diaries with me, your host Jack McCurdy, and today I am joined by Jessica Riffe. Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jack. How are you today?
I'm excellent, thank you so much for asking. I don't think anybody's ever asked me how I am at the start of one of these things, so that's really nice. I'm great, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much for joining me, Jessica. You are one of the GearSet DevOps leaders for 2025, which is for us is an immense privilege. And I'm very excited to have this conversation with you off the back of some other work that we've done together, and dive into some of your experiences leading a Salesforce team. But for the listeners, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your Salesforce journey so far?
Yes. So I've been in the Salesforce eco space since about 2009. So it's been a hot minute. I started as a developer. The team that I was on, we kind of inherited a Salesforce project and kind of moved up and learned a lot about development on Salesforce through the whole kind of journey. I started at American Fidelity, which is where I work today, in 2015. So I've been there for 10 years, starting as a developer and then moving up into the architect space for a couple years and then on into the manager space.
Amazing, amazing. Were you previously a developer from a different tech stack or technology?
Yes, way back when I was working in ASP.NET and VB.NET, and then the company I went to that moved into the Salesforce project was C Sharp.
Okay, okay. What was the transition like from traditional development to the Salesforce space?
It was very different. I was still a junior developer at the time, so I'm not gonna say I was a very good developer then. And some of the things that I had the harder time grasping was all of the what I consider red tape. It's not really red tape, but all of the security needed to just be able to access a record. And all of those things Salesforce handles for you out of the box. So you really get to not have to work with writing stored procedures and how you access it, but instead you get right into the business requirements and you get into the logic and how you're going to access things and how things are going to work, as opposed to turning around and handling all of the very nitty-gritty security stuff that you need to know, which you still need to. It was just um, not as in your face because the system handles so much of that out of the box.
Yeah, yeah. Is that a benefit or is that slightly a weird transition for folks to make if they are jumping into Salesforce?
For me,
I
it
guess
was a
was it weird for
benefit.
you?
For
Yeah,
me, it
for
was
a
a
benefit.
benefit because I really liked the logic piece. The logic piece is what really made more sense to me as a beginning developer, where having to pull in all of the, like how you access the procedure and how you access all of these different layers of code that you need for everything that you do, that was a hard concept for me to grasp. And then coming over to Salesforce, it wasn't quite as intensive. Um, I will say the other shift that we really had to go and dig into was how different Salesforce is, which is working with limits and working inside execution contexts and having to work on that multi-tenanted structure. So not having all your resources at your all disposal.
Yeah, just managing things with a little bit more efficiency and thought and consideration, I guess. Um,
Yes.
Rate limits, governor limits. I think governor limits tend to be the bane of most architects and developers' lives on this
Yes.
platform.
Yeah. Oh, you
um,
can't just query things with happy abandon? No, you cannot.
it's really interesting. So, tell me a little bit more about that journey, developer, architect, leading a team. What's what's that transition like? I guess starting with what's the difference between a developer and an architect in your mind, and based off what you've learned.
So every kind of level higher that you go, the more holistic view that you see of Salesforce. So as a developer, you're really focused on your small world of development. Um, just how things work. You're getting your requirements and you're very small and focused in the platform only. So when you start moving out to an architect, you start looking at, well, how are other systems going to be impacted by this system, or how are we going to impact other systems? How are we going to bring data in and get data out? So that view goes from small and it starts to grow to what is your footprint of your system in the company? And then even moving higher into the manager space of Salesforce, you really start looking at the strategy for Salesforce, the company strategy for how are we moving forward? What is our roadmap to go forward? You start having more of a forward-looking view of not where are we going to go, and what impacts are we making today that will set us up for tomorrow, and are we making sure we're moving on the right path to set our company up for success? So to me, your field of vision just expands the more that you change and the more that your role kind of morphs.
Yeah. Was there any particular challenge that you faced going from developer, architect, or even architect to manager? What do you think is the hardest thing to grasp for people on a similar path?
Stepping further away from building.
Because you love it so much and want to just do it all the time?
Yes, it's difficult to kind of let go a little bit and loosen the reins of your org that you're holding so tight, and all of your functionality that you've built or that you've had a hand in, and to hand that over to somebody else. And it's like you're handing your baby over and you're trusting them, please take care of it. And the further kind of out of development you go, the more you have to let go of those things. And you have to have trust and hope that you've trained, or that you train people to make the right decisions as they move forward.
Does documentation play a factor into that, and standards?
Documentation.
Either that's a
Yes.
documentation, like what documentation, or yes, you absolutely need documentation. I'm not sure.
You need documentation. I would say that that's something we've gotten better at. Documentation is a skill, and I think a lot of people don't realize that. And
Million
even
percent.
for how you document is a skill. Like when you approach documentation, you have to have a goal. And what is your goal? Is who's consuming your documentation? Is it the business, or is it another technical person? And I think you have to write to that. And I also fully believe in self-documenting code. So you should leave your code space in a good place for the next person. You're not just writing code for you to know what's going on. You need to set your code up for the next person who has to come and make changes, or maybe, heaven forbid, there's a bug and they need to go and digest what's going on. If your code is self-documented and easy to read, it should be very simple for them to go through and understand what your class is doing.
Yeah, that seems to be one of the things when we speak to developers. It tends to be, I inherited this code base and I have no idea why this thing is where it is, or what the decision behind this piece of logic was,
Yes.
or what have you. Help your fellow developers out.
Yes. Yes. Please don't just code for you. Code for the poor soul who's going to have to come and fix this after the fact.
And hey, sometimes that poor soul might even be yourself, and you're like, what was I thinking 2 years ago?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I come back and I'm like, who wrote this? Oh, crap, it was me. Darn
Oh,
it.
that's so funny. It's like holding up a mirror and just being like, "Oh,
Yeah.
what did I do? Oh, wait, it's that Spider-Man meme, where they're just pointing at each other."
Yes. Yes. Or
um,
Taylor Swift. It's me.
yeah,
I'm the problem. It's me.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Documentation. You said something really interesting about understanding who you're writing documentation for. You mentioned the business or other developers. What's the key difference between talking to somebody from the business side and the developer side, as it pertains to documentation, or even just in general conversations that you've found? And I imagine something that you have to do more regularly now as a manager in the space, rather than being hands-on keyboards.
Yes. So when you're writing technical documentation for the next person who's going to consume it or write it, I really think that we need to capture the why it was written like this. What's the original intent of the piece of code that we've written or created? And I think when you get into business documentation, it's more of a how-to. How do you use this? What is the expected outcomes when, you know, you're using this page or you're using this component? Um, I think that it's important to track, when I write documentation, I like to have pictures. So it also is a good indication if things have changed since the last time it was documented. But I like to have that really good picture of this is what you should put in, this is the expected outcome, this is what our expectations are when you're using it. So it's like functional use case documentation versus what's the decisions behind it and what are certain keys that drive different things in your code. For like variables, if you have something that's hidden for waiting for a certain condition, somebody on the front side is not going to know that. So you need that technical documentation. You need this to make this show.
Yeah, yeah, and for everybody that is, I can imagine there's many people that have benefited from your documentation just from how you're speaking about it. Have you had people come up to you and go and thank you so much for writing this, thank you so much for doing it?
Usually, no. I feel like half the
No, it's
time
just
it doesn't
thankless
get looked
task.
at.
See,
It just
this is
dies.
why documentation is such a big issue because it's just like if I write it, it's a thankless task and nobody's gonna look at it anyway. So why
Yeah.
do it? But the one time it's gonna be important, you'll be like, thank God I had the documentation, saved my ass.
Yes. I have had some. I had this really big diagram. It was more like a journey for how you use the whole like website. And I'm like, this goes in, does this. It was very large and complex, but it had tracks that you could follow and go to where you need to be. And then if somebody asks, well, what happens when you do this? I'm like, okay, well, let's pull it up. This is what happens. And it'll show like the whole life cycle and where it turns around. And was that a good diagram for like the C4 diagram? No. But does that one have more traction and use because people will ask me, what APIs are you using? At what point are you using this API? And I can just pull it up and be like, here, here, and here.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Development best practices, as we might be alluding to here, something that's important to you. I want to jump into the DevOps side of the conversation. Was DevOps quote unquote normal for you before stepping into Salesforce, or is the concept of DevOps and doing DevOps properly, I guess, something new since your Salesforce evolution? And what's kind of that approach been like for you?
So it wasn't new because it was pretty standard practice way back as a full stack developer. But I struggled with it a lot because back then it was very heavy Git commands. You've got your command line. I think Git was not new, but really getting a lot of traction at our company, and I just did not understand it at all. Because I'm a visual person, I'm like, I don't know what that command just did. I don't know if I just nuked everything. So that was very difficult for me to understand. And moving to Salesforce was kind of a catch-22, right? Because DevOps did not exist for Salesforce 15 years ago. We had
Mm,
change sets, and that was the best that you had, and good luck. Um, so there was no version control, there was nothing. You just had to make sure you hoped you got everything, that it would validate and deploy, when you practice from sandbox to sandbox before you got to production. Um, but fast forward to now, at AFA, I remember when we started, we didn't have a very good deployment procedure. It was still change sets, and change sets were obviously not great. But then we started looking at tools, And the tools that we came up to was GearSet. We looked at a few different options and we landed on GearSet, which was great because it would visualize changes. So now I'm not making command lines, I'm not making ant command lines. I am using a UI to pull in my comparison and I can choose, yep, I made those changes and I can deploy those. So it gave you a good visual aspect. And then company policy, right? You need to be tracking your development in source control. So we were tracking our changes, still using GearSet to use our branches and kind of go through code reviews and practice those up to get them to the next environment. And for a long time, that's where we stayed. So we just kind of stayed on that status quo. We would do our changes in our sandbox, and then we would move our changes to a branch that we copied off of what we call admin, and then code review it up, merge it in, and a CI job would push it up to admin. And that was the end of our process when it came to DevOps and version control. Because at that point, we would morph, still using GearSet, and we would push changes then from a different environment, like a staging environment, until we were ready to validate and deploy it to production. So over the last couple years, GearSet has made some new innovations using what is called pipelines. And pipelines, I remember several years ago, I went to just a webinar that I'd gotten invited to by GearSet, and they showcased pipelines, and I'm like, we need this. We
Give it to
100%
me.
need to do this. So after that, I started learning more about pipelines and how could I get our team on this. Because there was a lot of things kind of happening in the background at that time too. Is that our team had gone from 3 people, like 2 admins and a dev, to, I mean, now we sit at like 22 people on our Salesforce team. It's a large team, and we
That's a
grew.
lot of growth.
Yes, and we grew very fast over, the last 3 or 4 years, and that's a lot. So our now there's a lot of hands in the pot, right? And with that, there's been conflicts that arise code-wise that might not be caught early. They get caught much later in the process. So I had this idea, great or not, that's still debatable, to bring everybody into our DevOps pipeline. And so our admins were already using GearSet, so they're familiar with it. So I started introducing pipelines into kind of our development process. And what that did, even for our developers, is that now we're not just tracking things to our first staging level sandbox. Now we're really tracking the full scale, which was huge alone for our team because production org was our source of truth. And we had like jobs that ran and tracked it. But the differences between our production org and our kind of first level admin org were huge, huge. And there was no back propagation. It was difficult to stay up to date with changes. So I'm like, hey, I can solve all these problems. Let's go. So,
Bring it
um,
on.
yeah. So we had a really big, I say we, uh, I worked with a few other people to really turn our entire process from a small piece to a full scale. We're going from sandbox to production, we're back propagating, and you need to stay in sync type of process. So it was a lot
Yeah.
for your question.
Yeah, it is a lot, and coming back to the growth of your team, particularly 3 to 2022, I think you said that it is now. What fueled the growth in that team?
So Salesforce. our footprint in AFA has just grown. It's grown and grown. When we first started, we had Sales Cloud, which was great, for our sales team, getting them onboarded. But I think once we started getting them onboarded and the company was seeing the value, the metrics value, and um, I don't know, kind of all the tracking that you can see in it, it just continued to grow and continued to grow to where all the little groups are like, hey, we want on this, we want cases. And I think it really took off when we introduced Service Cloud and got kind of our call center colleagues in Salesforce. And I think that is really when it just and everybody wanted
Exploded.
on. And so we're trying to meet that demand and maintain our original implementations, and we don't have enough people to service this. We don't have enough people to support our colleagues. So we just continue to grow and grow.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
good
no,
problem to have.
yeah, absolutely. It's I always find it interesting to hear stories like that where you grow through the platform and taking on another cloud like service if you're just used to the sales and what have you. Yeah, no, yeah, we love growth. Puppy that's barking in the background. We we love that. It's always interesting to hear that and those drivers between team growths. And in conjunction with that, the other thing that I find really interesting in that has happened also in your case, and I might jump to a little bit of an assumption here, but transforming how your DevOps pipeline works and your DevOps processes work helps support that growth and your ability to deliver on the value that everybody in the business wants to get from Salesforce. Is DevOps the main thing that you think helps you scale that, or are there other aspects of what your team does that have helped support that growth?
I think there's other aspects to that too. I think what GearSet and our pipelines and moving into DevOps, I think what that really does with the explosive growth is that it helps have, now we're subjected to audits all the time. So now we have audit history and audit tracking that we can show, and we can really get to show, and it kind of comes in handy when you need to show historical changes on profiles. I mean, I know, or permission sets. I mean, I know we have those in audit tracking and stuff, but you can really see, what's going on holistically. I can see what happened 5 years ago. I mean, not today because we're still new in it, but potentially that is the goal. And what I really hope with DevOps and what our goal is stability. Um,
Stability.
One of the things, if we have a bunch of people pushing constantly, right? I feel like we're constantly moving changes. And one of the things that I really like that our pipelines did was, my dogs are still barking. Sorry,
It
was,
happens.
yeah, uh, running validations before anything is approved or pushed in. So I'm like, nope, you're going to need to have that validation ran before you ever merge anything. So they know ahead of time before we're trying to get things pushed in that this is either going to break everything or, it's good. Because there are times where we've got a lot of custom development and somebody will introduce a validation rule. And when you introduce a validation rule, if we've got a lot of code, it's going to break because we haven't taken into consideration when we create this record, we need to make sure this field is meeting the validation. And they don't realize that until they get further down the line. They're like, oh, the build is broken. And everybody's like, well, I didn't break it. I don't know what happened. So we can kind of see that and resolve those issues proactively instead of reactively, which I think is huge for our team. The other thing that's really good that it brings is collaboration. So if we've got 3 people who are set up to have deployments on a deployment day, well, now they can combine all those together and you only running one deployment instead of three and hoping that one doesn't break the others. So you've
Yeah.
got all of those kind of going ahead of time, which will make us faster in the long run. It makes our deployments more seamless in the future and makes us more stable. So,
And if you're doing combining three deployments, you can then validate the three deployments together in one
together.
before you even deploy it. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yep.
Um, Tell me a little bit about bringing admins and developers together in the process. Tell me a little bit how what that looked like, and I imagine there were challenges
Yes.
because
So
there
there,
always are. That tends to be the common denominator. Is there's challenges from bringing folks that aren't necessarily well versed in software development best practice like Git and version control to more, oh god, I hate saying it, but non-technical audience or a less technically minded for somebody that's used to a user UI based interfaces.
yes. The the biggest challenge we had is making sure that they understand what a branch is and what role a branch plays in DevOps. Because they'd been using this tool, they'd been using GearSet all this time, but they would be making changes from org to org. So kind of going in and teaching them, well, now we have branches. Well, what's a branch? Well, a branch is a copy of another branch. And they're like, I don't know what a branch is. And kind of explaining in, everything is metadata. You see the metadata in the comparisons. However, now you've got your own little sub branch that sits over here. So it that was challenging, and to understand commits versus like a deployment. And if you commit something to main, guess what? That's a deployment. You can't do that just on the fly. So that was some learning curves and understanding kind of what happens in the background. Because our tool does a lot for us in the background that we don't have to do. Specifically in like if we have a whole bunch of changes that are staged somewhere and then you need a new feature branch created, well, it kind of brings those with them, right? And it's not going to try to have you overwrite those changes. They weren't used to that, and they weren't used to getting latest from production either. So there were times where they would overwrite each other. And I'm like, no, you have to do a review. And they're like, we don't know how to do a review. And I'm like, okay. So we had to really go in and very explicitly define processes too, because it wasn't something that I'm like, well, y'all have been using GearSet, you guys can figure it out. Just figure out how you would like to do your review, and that left them kind of unsupported, and they didn't feel confident in the changes that they were being asked for. So we ended up pulling them out for a little while and let our developers run through the pipeline for several months, and then we brought them back in. And what we learned is that we need to have a very explicitly written out process map. And what does a process for every piece of the deployment process to go back and reference. And that was something that I didn't anticipate. I didn't anticipate the way that the admins were looking at flows because they were kind of doing reviews anyways, and they would do it in the tool, but they didn't know how to do it. Like, do we have to go to, our version control system to go do our review? Well, that's all in XML, and we can't see what our flow changes are. They don't make sense to us there. So, I mean, like giving them the freedom. No, you can pull up your comparison and you can look at it there, or you can pull it up in the org. Like you have that flexibility, and just standardizing that for them for what their reviews look like so they know what they're looking for. But I did find it to be very, very important to very explicitly define what the process they should be following to go back and reference as they're moving their changes through the pipeline.
Yeah, it's so interesting that we've kind of circled back to documentation, just a different
Yes,
form of documentation
documentation.
to the process explicitly. I mean, with and I really appreciate like your humility in saying I didn't foresee this being an issue, and just it's an
Yeah.
easy thing to overlook, I guess, if you're not you've used the tool, or it's not too different because you jump to that conclusion a little bit, and I guess was there for you like managing it? Was there like any was there frustration like for yourself, just like why aren't they getting it kind of thing, and what was that
Yes.
internal thought process for you like to go, I'm frustrated that they're not getting it, they should be getting it? What was your process to take a step back and come to the conclusion and the solution of actually building that process mapping and documentation for them?
So there were a couple things that were frustrating for them and for me. I think we were all frustrated. Um, was that, well, one, we're like, here's pipelines, and then I went on vacation. So I'm like, see ya, you guys got this. So don't do that. That's not great. Um, but we did have some other people too, and they were very overwhelmed because they were asking questions that they weren't equipped to resolve. Um, but, so there's that. Um, there was frustrations where, as my role has changed over time, I sit in a lot of meetings, which means my availability is not very high to be able to hop on a call and be like, yeah, I can go in and I can help you out on this. And having changes continue to go because they were nervous to do it the old way. And then now the old way, you deployed it to the org, but we're not in source control. So their change got overwritten. I'm like, well, yeah, because it has to exist in source. So there were a lot of growing pains in understanding that, where they weren't super well equipped for what are the ramifications if you don't do it. And other things come up like hot fixes. We have to fix this now. We can't get through the pipeline, we have to do it now. So that pushes through, and then, well, how do we get it all the way back through? Or if something pushes up and they need a rollback, well, rollbacks aren't, you can cherry pick and go back through them, but none of us were equipped enough to have that process defined. And we're like, well, for me, I'm like, oh, well, you just go pull the previous version, boom, you're good. And they're like, what? So it's there was a lot of learning that kind of went in, and not just on their side, but on my side too, for how to handle the not happy paths, and to have not only myself but them equipped to handle what do you do when things go bad. And um, we didn't handle that well, and that ultimately led to us pulling the admins out because they had to get changes through. They had to. We
Yeah.
can't stop work while we figure this out. So we pulled it down to a much smaller amount of changes flowing through the pipeline to regroup and try again.
Yeah, and you, as I understand it, you have now regrouped and are trying again.
Yes, yes. We brought them in earlier this month. So we've been 2 weeks, and nothing's blown up.
Yes.
I don't think anybody's crying in the closet anywhere. So,
and you haven't been on vacation.
yeah, I didn't go on vacation. I promised them. I'm like, I am not going on vacation. I'll be here. But I also think this round, even I haven't been pinged as much for help, or lack of understanding, or not being supported, or not following, as a developer, not taking more of the admin role into consideration with the change. So we tried our best to support all roles, and to help them feel supported and equipped. And I think this round, there's a lot more confidence going into it, from all around. And there's
Yeah.
more support with our developers using the pipeline for several months before they came back in. So they can help answer questions and they can help or even hold their hands if they need it to go through and walk with them on their journey for their changes.
Yeah, for sure. And that comes back again to the collaboration piece that you spoke about. Like, tooling can give you the ability to collaborate, but your team needs to do it too, and they need to be empowered
Yes.
to move towards that goal. Something that I think something that you said that I think will resonate with a lot of folks in similar positions to you in that managerial position is what you said about being in meetings all the time. You're not available
Hmm.
as available as maybe you personally would like to be for things like that. What is the key for platform managers, Salesforce platform owners, to being able to provide a good level of support to your team while balancing the needs of the business and having you involved in those meetings that you need to be able to strategically see the vision for Salesforce at American Fidelity?
Yes. I think I'm still learning and I think I'm still working to get to that happy spot. But what I think what we try to do is hold meetings to where we offer that support. So like have a Apex hours or admin hour, something where we can just come together and be like, hey, what's going on? Like, how can I help you today? Or office hours. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
To just have that availability. And I know a lot of times I'll hold one-on-ones with my team, and that's usually where I go in and try to help them. Like, I know I haven't been able to answer this question. Did it get answered? Is there anything that you need me to track down? Or sometimes I'll be like, hey, just message me and I will come back to this when I get a moment to you. And which to me, I don't think that's a super great answer, but sometimes that's the best I can. And sometimes I have to redirect them to somebody else. I'm like, I can't answer you right now. I'll have to look that up. I'll have to go ask somebody. However, you can go ask this person too, and you will probably get your answer a lot faster than I can give you. So I think some of it is empowering them. I
Mm.
know often with developers don't always feel confident to reach out to the business, and I'm like, just ask them a question. They're usually pretty good people, and they're gonna help you out. Um, so being able to support them, and I think another important thing is to make sure they feel heard. Which I think that's something that I'm still working on getting better at.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, that empowerment piece and is super critical to. So, I mean, something is a manager that I'm sure you think about as well is like, how are my team progressing and how are they growing professionally, and that empowerment piece and enabling them to go and have conversations that they might not usually have had or previously had will teach them a
mhm,
lot too about and help you collaborate with them better, like on a day-to-day basis as well, I guess.
mhm, yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Jessica, if you had one piece of advice for anybody starting a DevOps transformation and going down the path of GearSet, building their own solution, using one of the other providers, what would be your one piece of advice that you would leave the listeners that have listened to this podcast today with?
That's a great question. I think it's understanding who your users are going to be and make sure you're really taking into consideration their skill levels and that you're supporting them so that they feel confident when you're ready to move forward, that you're ready to move forward too, and that you're ready to support them in the transition. Because DevOps is great, but if we don't know how to use it or if we're not using it well, then it becomes where it doesn't make sense. So, and everybody knows DevOps is very important. That whole life cycle is very important, but it's also important to handle our process well and to handle our people through it, especially when it's new. When you're bringing in a new process, document that process. And we can't always have all the answers, but we can make them feel heard and try to support them the best we can and have an exit strategy to try again.
Amazing, Jessica. Words and advice spoken like a true sage and somebody that has been there, which you have shared throughout this podcast. And I really appreciate you like sharing that the whole journey and being so open and honest about your experiences. And listeners, you're very lucky that Jessica has given up her time to do this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been great. It's very exciting to have this opportunity.
For sure. Well, Jessica, I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more from you. Hopefully, we'll be hearing a lot more from you. This experience has been wonderful. Thank you for appearing on the podcast, and I will see you at an event very soon, in a couple of weeks' time.
Yes, sir. You will. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you have, like and subscribe in all of those good places, and I'll catch you on another episode sometime soon.